He hit a 20-year-old Apache giant, until he learned why she trembled before us. The man lived where the paved road ended and dust began. His small house sat behind old cottonwood trees, far from the noise of town. People passed the place without stopping, only noticing that the lights were always low and the gate stayed closed. He worked long hours repairing farm tools and fences, and when he returned home in the evenings, he spoke to no one. To most people, he was just another quiet man who wanted to be left alone. What no one talked about openly was the young woman who lived with him. Sometimes, very early in the morning, a tall figure could be seen moving behind the trees. She was impossible to miss once noticed. She stood far taller than most women her age, with wide shoulders and long arms that made her look stronger than she meant to be. People whispered about her size. Some called her a giant. Others said she must be dangerous. No one ever asked her name. The man never corrected them. He never invited anyone close enough to learn the truth. The woman was 20 years old, Apache by birth, and she carried herself like someone who had learned that being noticed could bring trouble. When she walked, her head stayed low. When a car slowed near the house, her steps would quicken. If voices rose outside the fence, her hands would shake, even if the words were friendly. Her body reacted before her mind had time to understand that she was safe. Inside the house, life moved quietly. The man kept things simple. Meals were plain but warm. Chairs were placed far apart, giving space. He spoke gently, never raising his voice, never standing too close unless she invited it. He had learned over time that loud sounds and sudden movements made her tense. Even laughter from a radio could make her flinch on bad days. He had not planned to become her protector. Years earlier, he had met her through a local community program that helped people find temporary shelter and work. She had arrived late one afternoon, standing at the edge of the room like she didn't belong there. Others noticed her height before they noticed her fear. Some stared. A few laughed quietly. One person joked without thinking. She left before the meeting ended. The man followed her outside, careful to keep his distance. He asked if she needed help. She didn't answer at first. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and unsteady. She said she was tired of being looked at like a problem. That was the first real sentence she had spoken to him, and it stayed with him. Over the weeks that followed, he learned pieces of her story, never all at once. She had grown up moving between places that were supposed to help her. Schools that didn't know what to do with her size. Programs that focused on control instead of care. Adults who spoke about her instead of to her. Each place had taken something from her confidence, until fear became her natural response. By the time she came to him, she expected rejection. What she found instead was patience. He offered her a place to stay, at first for a short time. She accepted only because she had nowhere else to go. Even then, she slept near the door, fully dressed, as if ready to leave at any moment. She startled at footsteps. She avoided mirrors. When neighbors passed by the fence, she disappeared into the trees. The man never forced her to explain herself. He let silence do the work. Slowly, she began to trust the routine. Breakfast at the same time each day. Work in the garden where no one could see her clearly. Evenings spent listening to quiet music or reading. Trust grew in small pieces, like something fragile being rebuilt. Outside the property, rumors grew. People noticed that the tall Apache woman never went into town. They wondered why the man kept her hidden. Some assumed the worst. Others claimed she was dangerous, that she must have done something wrong to deserve being shut away. No one considered that hiding could be an act of kindness. Whenever strangers came close, she trembled. Her hands shook. Her breathing became shallow. It wasn't anger or threat in her eyes, it was memory. The man saw it clearly. Her fear was old, deep, and learned through years of being misunderstood. He began turning people away. He stopped answering questions. When officials knocked once to check in, he refused to open the door. He knew that paperwork and labels had never helped her before. He knew that uniforms made her panic, even when no harm was intended. Inside, she apologized often, for her size, for her fear, for being too much. Each time, he reminded her she was neither a burden nor a danger. She listened, but believing was harder. The world had taught her that standing tall made others uneasy. That strength invited control. That being different meant being watched. So she learned to shrink in every way except the one she could not change. As the months passed, the man understood that what he was doing looked strange from the outside. A tall young woman hidden away. A man refusing visitors. A quiet life filled with unspoken rules. But he also knew the truth. She was not hidden to be controlled. She was hidden so she could breathe. Still, pressure was building. The town did not like unanswered questions. People wanted explanations. They wanted to know who she was, why she lived there, and what the man was really doing. None of them saw her sitting by the window at night, watching shadows, shaking when headlights passed. None of them heard her whisper that she was scared of being taken again. None of them knew that her trembling had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with survival. For now, the man kept the gate closed and the lights low. He believed he could protect her a little longer. He believed that silence was safer than truth, but deep down, he sensed that hiding could not last forever. And when the world finally demanded answers, he feared that her shaking hands would tell a story far older and heavier than anyone was prepared to hear. The young Apache woman had grown up carrying the weight of being different in a world that never seemed to understand her. Even though she was only 20, the experiences she had endured made her act as if she were decades older. Her size, which could have been a source of pride, had instead been a source of fear, isolation, and misunderstanding. She had learned early that the world did not treat strength or difference kindly, and so she had learned to shrink herself, to make herself smaller in every way she could. Her childhood was not cruel in the way some stories were, but it was full of small cuts that never healed properly. Teachers looked at her as a problem to manage rather than a child to guide. Classmates whispered behind her back, giggling at her height or wide shoulders, calling her names that stung even if she pretended not to hear. Friends were rare, and the few who tried to be kind often drifted away, influenced by the judgmental murmurs around them. At home, things were not much better. She had moved between homes, living with relatives, foster families, and temporary shelters. Each move brought a new routine, a new set of rules, and a new way in which she did not fit. In some homes, she was treated like an adult too soon, expected to take on responsibilities that felt impossible. In others, she was ignored, left to fend for herself. She quickly learned that adults were unpredictable and that people could be cruel or dismissive without warning. By the time she had reached adolescence, fear had become second nature. Fear of being controlled, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being hurt for simply existing. She had learned that showing her true self, standing tall, speaking firmly, moving confidently, invited attention she could not afford. Her size made her visible in a way other girls her age were not, and with visibility came judgment, expectations, and sometimes punishment. When she first arrived at the man's home, all of this was still fresh in her memory. Every sound, every sudden movement, every person's eyes made her body react before her mind could catch up. Her hands would tremble. Her breathing would quicken. Even small gestures, like someone knocking on a door or turning on a light suddenly, could make her flinch. These reactions were not signs of weakness, but signs of survival. She had learned to respond to danger, and in her mind, strangers were always a potential threat. The man had known none of this when he first met her, but he noticed quickly that something was different about her. Unlike other young women he had met, she did not speak freely or easily. Her voice, when she used it, was quiet and hesitant. She avoided looking directly at people. She seemed to shrink into herself, almost as if she were trying to disappear. And yet, beneath the fear, he saw moments of curiosity and intelligence. Her eyes, when she allowed them to shine, were bright and attentive. She noticed details that others missed: the way the wind moved through the trees, the subtle changes in sunlight, the way animals behaved. Over time, as she settled into the quiet routine of his home, fragments of her past emerged. She spoke of the foster home she had lived in, of teachers who had given up on her, of classmates who had laughed or stared. She spoke of the weight of being different in a society that prizes conformity. Even though she did not speak often, each story she told painted a picture of resilience. She had survived, and she had survived alone. The man listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. He understood that her trust had to be earned, and that pushing her too quickly could undo all the progress they had made. He gave her space, allowed her to set the pace, and slowly she began to open up. At first it was small things: a comment about the garden, a question about a bird, a remark on the sky. Then over weeks and months she spoke more about herself, about what she liked and disliked, what she feared and what she hoped for. It was during these quiet conversations that the man realized the depth of her strength. Despite her fear, she had survived hardships that would have broken many people. Despite years of being misunderstood, she retained a spark of curiosity, a desire to connect, a wish to be seen as more than her size or her past. And yet, he also saw how deep her fear ran. Every encounter with the outside world reminded her of past pain. A stranger's glance could send her heart racing. A raised voice could bring tears to her eyes. Her trembling was not weakness. It was the echo of years of being misunderstood and mistreated. The man also began to understand that hiding her was not simply about keeping her away from people. It was about giving her time to heal, to reclaim a sense of safety that she had never fully known. In the outside world, she had been treated as a problem to solve, a challenge to control. Here, she was allowed to be herself, even if that self was scared and hesitant. He set rules in the house that were simple but powerful. No one entered without her permission. No sudden movements, no loud noises, no questions that she was not ready to answer. The routine became her anchor. Meals at the same time each day, quiet evenings with soft music, gardening in the mornings where she could move without being watched. Every small detail mattered. Every gesture of patience and care helped her feel that, for the first time, the world could be a safe place. Even with these protections, she remained wary. She did not trust easily. Memories of past abuse lingered, haunting her in moments when she felt most secure. Sometimes she would wake in the night trembling, heart pounding from a dream she could not remember. Sometimes she would freeze when someone knocked on the gate or drove slowly past the house. Her fear was like a shadow she carried, even when she was safe. The man understood that rebuilding trust would take years, not months. He did not rush her. He did not push her into situations she was not ready for. Instead, he focused on creating an environment where she could practice feeling safe. Slowly, the trembling began to lessen. Slowly, she began to move through the house without flinching. Slowly, she began to speak more freely, testing the waters of human connection. Outside the property, rumors continued to grow. People noticed the tall young woman who never left the house. They whispered about her size and her presence. Some imagined terrible stories, convinced she must be dangerous. Others speculated that the man had secrets to hide. No one guessed the truth, that she was not dangerous at all. She was simply someone who had been hurt by the world and needed time to heal. The man rarely explained. He turned questions away gently but firmly. He knew that explanations would not help. Outsiders could not understand the depth of fear she carried. What mattered was not what people thought, but how she felt. And she felt safe here. Despite her fear, small moments of joy began to appear. She would laugh quietly when something amused her. She would marvel at flowers blooming in the garden. She would notice the way light moved across the walls in the morning. These small joys were victories. Each one was a step away from fear and toward trust. The man also began to see her potential. He saw how strong she was, not just physically, but emotionally. He saw intelligence, creativity, and courage that had been buried under years of fear. He began to wonder what she could accomplish if she were ever able to face the world without trembling. But he knew that day was not yet. For now, his role was clear: protect, support, and give her time. He thought often about the past she had carried with her. He wondered how many others had been hurt by misunderstanding, by fear, by the inability of adults to see beyond appearances. He realized that her trembling was not just a reaction to him or the immediate world, it was a reaction to life itself. And yet, he also saw hope. She had survived, and she was still learning to trust. She was still learning that not all people were threats. She was still learning that she could exist in the world without being broken by it. As months passed, a quiet bond grew between them. It was not loud or dramatic. It was built in small, consistent acts of care. She trusted him to be patient. He trusted her to take small steps toward healing. And together, they created a life that, while simple, was filled with meaning and understanding. The outside world remained unaware, and she preferred it that way. For now, she did not want to face scrutiny or judgment. She did not want to be measured or compared or labeled. She only wanted to exist without fear, and with the man's protection, she finally could. Yet, even in this quiet haven, the truth of her past lingered. The stories she had lived were still with her, shaping her reactions and thoughts. She trembled not out of weakness, but out of the deep imprint of a life spent being misunderstood. And the man knew that one day, the outside world would demand answers. But for now, in this small house behind cottonwood trees, she was allowed to breathe, to be herself, and to slowly reclaim a sense of peace that she had never truly known before. The young Apache woman had begun to feel more comfortable inside the small house, but the outside world still held dangers she could not forget. Her body remembered before her mind could understand. Every time someone approached, whether a neighbor, a passerby, or an official, her hands shook, her heart raced, and her breathing became uneven. The trembling was not a choice. It was the echo of years of experiences that had taught her that strangers could be unpredictable, and visibility often meant risk. It had not always been this way. As a child, she had been curious, playful, and bright. But as she grew taller than most of her peers, she began to notice the difference first, and then the reactions of others. Children stared, whispered, and sometimes laughed. Teachers treated her differently, expecting more, controlling her movements, and correcting her loudly in front of the class. Even simple activities, like playing sports or walking through crowded hallways, became challenges not because of her strength, but because people did not know how to respond to it. Her adolescence was filled with what she now understood were misunderstandings and misplaced discipline. One school tried to make her fit into a uniform of rules and expectations that did not match her life. She was often singled out for mistakes she did not make, not because she had done anything wrong, but because being different drew attention. At home, in foster care placements, she was sometimes ignored and sometimes expected to take on responsibilities far beyond her years. No one had taught her how to channel her strength into confidence or how to face the world safely. Instead, she learned that appearing too big, too loud, or too strong could make people uncomfortable or even hostile. These memories did not stay buried. They resurfaced with every sound from outside the house: a car's engine, footsteps on gravel, the creak of a gate. Even a dog barking could startle her. Her body reacted long before her mind could assure her that there was no danger. She trembled not from anger, not from weakness, but from a conditioned response that had been reinforced over the years. Her life had taught her to expect the worst, and her body remembered every lesson. The man who had taken her in noticed these reactions immediately. Unlike others, he did not try to push her, scold her, or make her feel ashamed for trembling. Instead, he learned to recognize the signs and to respond with calmness and patience. He spoke softly when he sensed her fear rising. He made space between them so she would not feel trapped. He allowed her to move freely within the house and garden without forcing her to confront the outside world before she was ready. In small ways, he created a bubble of safety around her, where trembling could happen without judgment, where fear could exist without consequences. One day, a neighbor's child wandered near the edge of the property. The woman froze. Her hands shook violently and she stepped back instinctively. The man gently guided her away from the fence, whispering that the child meant no harm. She trembled for several minutes after, unable to stop, though the danger had passed. That day, the man realized just how deep her reactions ran. They were not temporary or simple. They were ingrained into her very being. Her fear was a memory that existed in her body long before it could be explained in words. Her past had not only shaped her fear, but had also limited her experiences of trust. Each move between homes, each new set of rules, each misunderstanding with authority figures had taught her that adults could not always be relied upon. She had seen people make promises and break them. She had experienced protection that turned into control. She had trusted and been disappointed. It was no wonder that the idea of strangers, even kind strangers, could trigger panic. Yet inside the house, she began to explore the idea of safety. She noticed that the man did not ask her to explain herself every day. He did not pressure her to go out or to answer the questions she could not face. Slowly, she began to let herself believe that being visible in his presence was not dangerous. Slowly, she discovered that trembling could end and that calmness could exist. She learned that some people could offer patience without judgment, understanding without expectation. Even so, the world outside remained a constant threat in her mind. Memories of foster homes came back uninvited. She remembered being woken in the middle of the night to move to a new placement. She remembered being forced into group activities where everyone stared at her, where her size made her different, and where mistakes were magnified. She remembered teachers calling her names in front of the class, and adults punishing her for reactions that were natural, human, and necessary for survival. The man knew that her trembling before outsiders was more than fear. It was history repeating itself. It was trauma embodied in muscle and nerve. She did not need scolding. She did not need force. She needed time, patience, and validation. So he allowed her to observe the outside world from the safety of the house. He would open the blinds slowly and let her watch neighbors from a distance. He would take her to the garden where she could see the street but remain behind the fence. Step by step, he introduced small interactions without pressure, letting her nervous system adjust at its own pace. Sometimes, she would retreat even after making progress. A simple gesture from a passerby, a wave, a smile, or even a shout to someone else could send her back into fear. She would shrink into the corner, trembling, and the man would simply sit beside her, offering presence without words. His calmness became a counterbalance to the memories she could not erase. Slowly, the trembling became less frequent, though it never fully disappeared. It had been part of her for too long. She also began to speak more about her past. She described in fragments the experiences that shaped her reactions. She spoke about classrooms where she felt too big, too loud, too visible. She spoke about homes where she was ignored or treated as a burden. She spoke about teachers, authority figures, and peers who made her feel as though her very existence was wrong. And as she spoke, the man listened without interruption. He did not offer advice unless asked. He did not try to explain or correct what had happened. He simply listened, providing the rare experience of being heard without judgment. Through these stories, the man began to see the depth of her resilience. Despite years of misunderstanding, rejection, and fear, she had survived. She had survived when others might have given up. She had survived with trembling hands and cautious movements, and yet she had endured. Her strength was not just in her size, but in her ability to keep going, to exist, and to slowly reclaim a sense of safety. As he learned more about her past, he realized that her trembling was also a warning system. It was her body's way of keeping her safe. Every flinch, every quiver, every step back from a stranger was not weakness. It was wisdom born of survival, and he respected it. He understood that forcing her to confront the world prematurely could undo years of cautious progress. In this way, the man and the woman developed a rhythm together. He became a guide and a shield, creating conditions where she could test the waters of trust without danger. She began to respond with small gestures of courage, stepping a little closer to the window when someone walked by, speaking a little louder, laughing quietly when something amused her. Each small victory was celebrated quietly, without fanfare, but with deep acknowledgement of its importance. Yet, the question remained, why did she tremble before outsiders? It was not merely fear of strangers or unfamiliar situations. It was the accumulated weight of years spent being treated as different, as a problem, as someone to be corrected or controlled. It was the memory of childhood moments where being tall or strong invited punishment instead of guidance. It was the memory of homes where her needs were misunderstood, where adults acted out of control rather than care. Her trembling was the echo of all of these experiences. The man realized that understanding this was the key to helping her. He needed to see the trembling not as a problem, but as a signal of history, a trace of the life she had lived before she came to him. By acknowledging it, he could help her begin to untangle the present from the past, to separate real danger from old memories, and to learn that some people, himself included, meant only safety. They began small exercises, carefully planned and gentle. He would let her sit by the window while he answered the door to a trusted neighbor. He would take her short walks in areas where no one else was around. He would encourage her to notice the sights and sounds without reacting immediately. And slowly, over weeks and months, the trembling began to lessen. Not disappear, but lessen. She started to understand that fear did not always mean danger. Even as progress was made, she never forgot her past. She remembered the homes, the schools, the authority figures, and the classmates who had contributed to the fear that still lived in her body. She remembered how difficult it had been to feel safe anywhere. And yet, with the man's patience and care, she began to see that safety could exist. She began to believe that not all people would respond to her strength with control or fear. She began to understand that her trembling was a memory, not a rule. By the end of this period, she had made remarkable progress. She could walk past the fence without immediate fear. She could engage in conversation without trembling constantly. She could even leave the property briefly under the man's careful guidance. But most importantly, she began to internalize a new truth, that she could exist in the world without being punished for her size, her strength, or her difference. She could exist and be seen, and not everyone would cause harm. The man watched this transformation quietly, proud and cautious. He knew the outside world would not always understand her. He knew that rumors, questions, and misunderstandings would continue. But he also knew that she was learning, step by step, to reclaim herself. And that was the beginning of something far greater than safety. It was the beginning of trust, resilience, and the possibility of freedom. Months had passed since the young Apache woman had arrived at the quiet house behind the cottonwood trees. She had grown taller and stronger, but more importantly, she had begun to trust. The trembling that had once defined her every reaction had softened, though it never completely disappeared. She had learned that safety could exist, that some people would not hurt her, and that the world outside her small home could be approached carefully, not avoided entirely. The man watched her each day with a careful eye. He had become accustomed to the rhythm of her life, the small victories, the careful steps forward, and the retreats into silence when memories became too strong. But he also knew that the time was approaching when he could no longer keep her hidden. The world, curious and persistent, would demand answers sooner or later. Questions about her presence, her size, and her past were bound to come, and the man could not protect her forever by hiding her away. He spent long nights thinking about how to handle it. He understood that revealing her story was risky. Some people might not understand, might judge, might even respond with fear. But he also knew that hiding her indefinitely would limit her life, deny her identity, and keep her from growing fully into herself. Slowly he began to form a plan. He would tell the truth, but carefully, slowly, and only when she felt ready. The woman sensed the change in him. There was a seriousness in his tone that she had not heard before. He began to speak to her about the future in a gentle, cautious way. He asked her what she wanted, how she felt, and whether she was ready to be seen. At first, she hesitated. The idea of facing the world, of standing tall where everyone could see her, filled her with fear. Her body responded automatically, trembling and shaking even as her mind tried to be brave. "I don't know if I can," she said quietly one evening, sitting by the window. Her hands shook as she spoke, not from weakness but from years of habit. "What if they judge me? What if they think I'm a problem again?" The man nodded. He had expected this fear. "We will go slowly," he said. "I will be with you. No one will force you. You decide the pace. And if you need to retreat, we will retreat. But hiding forever isn't the answer. You deserve to be seen, and people deserve to know the truth about you." Her eyes met his for the first time in a long while, and she saw the calmness in his gaze. It was not a gaze of judgment or control. It was a gaze of respect and understanding. Slowly, she began to believe that she might survive being seen, that the world could respond differently than she feared. The first step was small. He asked her to stand in the garden while he opened the gate for a trusted neighbor. She hesitated, trembling from head to toe, but she agreed. The neighbor greeted her with a soft smile and kind words. The woman's body shook violently at first, but the man stood nearby, his presence steadying her. She took a deep breath, noticing that the words were not threats. The smile was not a judgment, and slowly the trembling began to ease. It was not gone, but she survived the encounter without retreating. After this, the man decided it was time to tell her story to a few select people, individuals he trusted to listen without fear or judgment. He gathered a small group of neighbors and community members who had always shown kindness. The woman was nervous, her hands shaking as she entered the room, but she allowed the man to lead the conversation. He began by speaking gently, explaining why she had been hidden and why she had lived a life of quiet protection. He told them about her strength, her fear, and her past. He explained that her trembling was not weakness but a response shaped by years of misunderstanding and fear. And then slowly he introduced her. She stood there, taller than everyone else, her shoulders wide and strong. For a moment she wanted to retreat, to disappear into the shadows. But then she remembered the man's words. She had the right to be seen, and the world had the right to know the truth. She took a deep breath, letting herself be present in the room. Her hands trembled, but she did not run. Her voice was quiet but steady as she spoke a few words about herself, about the challenges she had faced, and about the life she had built with the man's help. The reaction was different than she had feared. People listened. They nodded. Some even smiled gently. No one mocked her size. No one questioned her right to be there. They understood in their own way that her trembling was part of a story they had never heard before. And for the first time, she felt a sense of validation. She realized that being seen did not have to be dangerous, that people could respond with kindness, not fear. Over the next weeks, the man and the woman slowly expanded her interactions with the world. She walked to nearby stores with him, always at her own pace. She met more neighbors, attended community gatherings for brief moments, and learned that her presence could be accepted without judgment. Each step was carefully guided, each interaction planned with care. And each success strengthened her confidence, helping her to untangle the fear of the past from the possibilities of the present. The man also encouraged her to speak about her story more openly, teaching her that her experiences, though painful, were important. She began to understand that her trembling could be explained, that people could be patient, and that her past did not have to define her future. With every small success, she grew stronger, more confident, and more willing to be present in the world. Yet, it was not always easy. Memories would resurface unexpectedly. A raised voice in the store could trigger a flashback. A sudden movement on the street could make her freeze. And sometimes, she would retreat into silence, her hands trembling as though the years of fear had returned all at once. But the man was always there, patiently guiding her back, helping her to breathe, helping her to remember that the past was not the present. The turning point came when she was invited to a community event, a small cultural gathering that celebrated Apache traditions. The man asked her if she wanted to attend. She hesitated, trembling, but then nodded. For the first time, she faced a larger group of people on her own terms. She walked slowly, her shoulders tense, but she was present. She listened, observed, and even participated in a few activities. People approached her with respect, acknowledging her presence without fear or judgment. And in that moment, she felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. The man watched her from a distance, proud and cautious. He knew the outside world would not always be safe, but he also knew that she had taken a giant step. She had faced fear and chosen to be present. She had allowed herself to be seen, even while trembling. And she had learned that fear could coexist with courage, that trembling could coexist with strength, and that vulnerability could coexist with resilience. Back at the house, she reflected on what had happened. She realized that hiding had protected her, but it had also limited her. She had learned that being seen did not have to be dangerous, that people could respond with understanding, and that she could navigate the world without being erased. Slowly, she began to envision a future where she could move freely, speak openly, and exist without fear. The man knew that the journey was far from over. The outside world could still be harsh. Rumors and misunderstandings could return. And yet, he also knew that she was ready to face it, step by step, with courage and patience. Together, they had created a foundation of trust, understanding, and resilience. A foundation that could withstand fear, misunderstanding, and the challenges of life beyond the gate. In the quiet of the evening, she stood by the window, looking at the street beyond. Her hands still trembled occasionally, but she no longer felt powerless. She had faced fear, shared her story, and taken the first steps toward reclaiming her life. And as she looked out, she understood something important. The world could be challenging, but it could also be kind. She could exist fully, even if trembling remained part of her body's memory. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she was not hidden, not feared, and not misunderstood. She imagined a life where people could see her strength, her story, and her courage. She imagined a life where her trembling was understood as part of her journey, not as a limitation. And in that quiet moment, she realized that she was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she had survived the past and was learning to thrive in the present. The young Apache woman had spent months slowly stepping into the world beyond the small house. Each day had been a careful, measured effort, guided by the quiet patience of the man who had taken her in. What had once been impossible, walking past strangers, answering questions, even speaking in a room full of people, was gradually becoming natural. The trembling that had once defined her every reaction was still present at times, but it no longer controlled her life. She had learned to coexist with fear, and she had discovered the courage to continue despite it. The man knew that it was time for her to take a larger step. The world outside had been watching, whispering and questioning for years, and now it was time to confront those whispers with truth. But he also understood that she could not face it alone. He would stand with her, not as a shield, but as a guide and support, letting her claim her own space in the world while ensuring she felt safe. One morning, he suggested that they attend a small community meeting at the local cultural center. The woman hesitated, her hands shaking as she considered the crowd she would face. She remembered the times when she had been laughed at, stared at, or misunderstood. Fear rose in her chest, strong and familiar, but she looked at the man and saw the calm reassurance in his eyes. Slowly, she nodded, and together, they prepared to step into a new chapter of her life. At the cultural center, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. People greeted them politely, some curious, some already aware of her story through quiet rumors and whispers. The woman's heart raced as she stepped inside. Her hands trembled and her breath came in short, cautious bursts, but she did not turn back. The man walked beside her, speaking softly, reminding her that she had survived fear before and that she was strong enough to survive it again. As the meeting began, she took a seat near the back, observing quietly. She noticed the faces of the people around her, some smiling gently, others nodding in acknowledgement, and a few looking at her with respectful curiosity. She felt the old instinct to shrink, to disappear, rise within her. But she also felt something new, a small spark of courage that reminded her of how far she had come. When the man spoke, he introduced her briefly and shared parts of her story, carefully explaining the challenges she had faced and the strength she had shown in surviving them. He emphasized that her trembling and fear were not signs of weakness, but of resilience. He explained that she had lived through situations that most people could not imagine, and that she deserved understanding, respect, and patience. The woman listened quietly, feeling the warmth of understanding in the room. For the first time, she realized that people could respond with kindness instead of fear. She realized that her past, though painful, did not have to dictate how the present or future would unfold. Slowly she raised her hand, and when invited, she spoke. Her voice was soft, trembling at first, but it carried sincerity and strength. She thanked the community for listening, shared a few words about her experiences, and expressed her hope for a life where she could be seen and accepted for who she truly was. There was silence for a moment, and then a wave of quiet applause filled the room. People nodded, some with tears in their eyes, some with smiles of encouragement. No one laughed, no one judged, no one questioned her right to be present. It was the first time in her life that being visible felt safe and even affirming. She realized that the world could respond differently than she had feared, that courage and trust could create space for acceptance. Over the following weeks, she became more active in her community. She visited the local library, attended small gatherings, and even participated in cultural events celebrating Apache traditions. Each experience was carefully paced, each interaction guided with patience, but with every step, her confidence grew. She began to speak more freely, walk taller, and engage with people without the constant shadow of fear. The man continued to support her, not as a protector who hid her away, but as a companion who encouraged her independence. He celebrated every victory, no matter how small. A conversation without trembling, a smile returned by a neighbor, a day spent outside without fear. These moments were not dramatic, but they were powerful. They marked the reclamation of a life that had long been constrained by misunderstanding and fear. One day, a local teacher who had once helped her in a difficult moment reached out. She had heard about the young woman's journey and wanted to meet her. The encounter was nervous at first, memories of being misunderstood surfaced. But the teacher approached with genuine respect and kindness, and the young woman felt a sense of closure she had never experienced before. She realized that not all adults would respond with control or judgment, and that some people could genuinely care and support her growth. This realization deepened her trust in herself and in the world around her. She began to imagine a future where she could pursue her interests, make her own decisions, and build relationships without fear of being judged for her size or strength. She discovered that her uniqueness could be an asset, not a liability, and that people could appreciate her for who she was rather than fearing or misunderstanding her. At home, the man noticed the change in her demeanor. She walked with more confidence, laughed more freely, and even allowed herself moments of playfulness that had been rare before. He felt a quiet pride, knowing that his patience and care had helped her reclaim a part of herself that had been suppressed for years. But he also knew that the journey was ongoing, that fear could resurface, that challenges could appear, and that she would need to continue practicing trust and courage. The community began to accept her fully. People who had once whispered now spoke kindly to her. Neighbors invited her to events, friends acknowledged her presence, and the young woman discovered the simple joy of being seen without fear. Her trembling became a rare occurrence, only appearing when memories or unexpected situations briefly reminded her of the past. But she had learned to manage it, to breathe through it, and to continue moving forward. One afternoon, she stood in the garden, looking at the sun setting behind the cottonwood trees. The man joined her, and they watched the sky together in comfortable silence. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the years of fear, misunderstanding, and isolation, and the slow, careful steps that had allowed her to reclaim her life. She realized that she was no longer just a person who trembled. She was a woman who had faced fear, survived it, and was learning to thrive in a world that she had once believed would always reject her. The man spoke quietly, breaking the silence. "You have come so far," he said. "You are no longer hidden, you are seen, and you are strong." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I am still learning," she admitted, "but I feel different. I feel like I belong finally." And she did. She belonged, not because the world had changed entirely, but because she had found her place in it, one step at a time. She had learned that being seen did not have to be dangerous, that her past did not define her future, and that courage could coexist with vulnerability. Her story became known quietly in the community. People shared her experiences as a lesson in patience, understanding, and compassion. They learned that appearances could be misleading, that fear was often rooted in past experiences, and that everyone deserved to be seen and understood on their own terms. And for the young Apache woman, this recognition was deeply validating. She realized that her life, her strength, and even her trembling had meaning, and that she could continue to grow, explore, and thrive. Over time, she began to dream. She imagined a life where she could help others like her, where she could advocate for understanding, and where she could build a world that responded to strength and difference with respect rather than fear. She began to see her past as part of her story, not as a chain that bound her. She could carry it, learn from it, and use it to shape a future filled with possibility. The man continued to support her, but now in a different way. He was no longer the sole protector who hid her away. He was a companion, a mentor, and a friend, standing beside her as she claimed her place in the world. He witnessed her growth, her confidence, and her courage, and he knew that she was ready to face life fully, with all its challenges and opportunities. The final step came when she attended a larger community gathering. She stood among people who had once feared or misunderstood her, and she realized that they now respected her, valued her, and accepted her. She spoke with confidence, her hands steady, her voice clear. People listened, smiled, and responded with warmth. For the first time, she felt truly integrated into the world, not as someone to hide, not as someone to fear, but as a woman who had survived, learned, and grown into herself. As she walked home that evening, the man beside her, she felt a sense of peace she had never known. The trembling that had once been constant was now a rare reminder of the past. She had faced fear, confronted misunderstanding, and found a place where she belonged. And in that moment, she realized that she was not a giant in the way people once said. She was simply a woman who had lived, learned, and emerged stronger for it. The man smiled quietly, proud not only of her courage but of the bond they had formed. Together, they had created a life of patience, understanding, and resilience. She had reclaimed herself, and the world had finally learned to see her, not with fear, but with respect and acceptance. In the quiet of the evening, as the sun disappeared behind the trees, she whispered softly to herself, "I am ready." And for the first time in her life, she truly was.